"She's plain as old bread and twice as boring," Duke Raphael Blackwood announced to his drinking buddies, his voice echoing through the wood-paneled study of Blackwood Manor. The fire crackled in the fireplace as he took another gulp of brandy. "My father actually expects me to marry this mouse and make babies with her. I'd rather marry my hunting dog." His three companions burst into laughter, their crystal glasses catching the orange light from the flames. They had no idea that Lady Evangeline Fairfax stood just outside the half-open door, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She had only come to return a book to the library next door, never thinking she would hear her future husband talking about her like this. "But the Fairfax girl does come with a nice fat dowry," Lord Pemberton said with a smirk, swirling his drink. "What is it? £30,000. Try 40,000, Raphael corrected with a bitter laugh that made Evangeline's stomach turn. "My dear dead father left me with so many debts that I need every penny. But I swear on my mother's grave, gentlemen, I'm going to make that stuck-up little church mouse sorry she ever agreed to this joke of a marriage. If I have to put up with her boring company, she's going to learn what happens when you mess with a Blackwood." The other men chuckled and nodded their approval. "What's your plan then?" asked Sir Marcus, leaning forward with interest. "Oh, I have plenty of ideas," Raphael said, his voice turning cold and mean. "First, I'll make sure she knows exactly how little I think of her. Then I'll parade my mistresses right under her plain little nose. Maybe I'll even bring Lady Catherine to our wedding breakfast. Let's see how the virtuous Miss Fairfax handles that insult." Evangeline felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. The leather-bound book slipped from her shaking hands and hit the marble floor with a loud thud. The talking inside stopped immediately. "What was that noise?" Raphael asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. Before anyone could move, Evangeline pushed the door open wide and walked into the room. Her chin was up, her back straight, and her green eyes were blazing with anger. The four men scrambled to their feet, their faces turning red with embarrassment. "Miss Fairfax," Raphael stammered, clearly shocked. We didn't know you were." "Obviously," Evangeline said in a calm, steady voice that surprised even her. She looked directly at Raphael, not blinking. "I came to return a book to your library, Your Grace. I had no idea I would get such an education about my future husband's character." The other three men looked like they wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. Lord Pemberton cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should give you two some privacy," he mumbled, already heading for the door. "No, please stay," Evangeline said sweetly, never taking her eyes off Raphael. "I'm sure you'll want to hear this too, since you seem so interested in my dowry and my appearance." Raphael tried to recover his composure. He straightened his shoulders and put on his most arrogant expression. "Evangeline, you're being dramatic. Men talk freely among friends. You shouldn't have been listening to a private conversation." "A private conversation about me?" she shot back. "About how boring and plain I am. About how you plan to humiliate me with your mistresses." Her voice started to rise. "About how you're only marrying me for my money? Well, it's not as if this is a love match," Raphael said coldly. "Our fathers arranged this marriage for business reasons. We both know that." Evangeline stepped closer to him, her eyes never leaving his face. "You're absolutely right, Your Grace. This is not a love match. But I thought we could at least have respect for each other. I thought we could try to build something decent together." She paused, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I was clearly wrong." Then, before anyone could react, Evangeline drew back her hand and slapped Raphael hard across his left cheek. The sound echoed through the quiet room like a gunshot. His head snapped to the side, and a bright red mark appeared on his pale skin. "How dare you?" he hissed, raising his own hand. "Go ahead," Evangeline said, standing perfectly still. "Hit me." Show these gentlemen what kind of man you really are. Show them how the great Duke of Blackwood treats a woman. Raphael's hand froze in the air. He looked around at his friends, who were staring at him with wide eyes. Slowly, he lowered his arm. I'm calling off this engagement, Evangeline announced, pulling off the diamond ring from her finger and throwing it at his feet. I won't marry a man who has so little honor that he plans to humiliate his wife before he even marries her. She turned to leave, but Raphael grabbed her arm. You can't break our engagement, he said desperately. The contracts are signed. Your father will never agree to it. Evangeline looked down at his hand on her arm, then back up at his face. Let go of me, she said quietly, but there was steel in her voice. He released her immediately. You're right about the contracts, she said with a sad smile. My father cares more about this business deal than he does about my happiness. And your debts mean you can't afford to let me go. She bent down and picked up the ring, sliding it back onto her finger. So I suppose we're stuck with each other. Raphael looked confused. Then why did you? Consider it a warning, Your Grace, Evangeline said, her voice returning to that eerily calm tone. You think I'm just a plain, boring mouse who will quietly let you walk all over her. You think you can treat me like dirt and I'll just take it with a smile. She stepped closer to him again, so close he could see the gold flecks in her green eyes. You're about to learn just how wrong you are. The three other men exchanged nervous glances. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. What's that supposed to mean? Raphael asked, trying to sound tough, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Evangeline smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile a cat might give a mouse before pouncing. It means, dear husband-to-be, that you've just made the biggest mistake of your life. You wanted to marry a mouse. She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin higher. Congratulations. You're about to marry a lioness instead. She walked to the door, then turned back one last time. The wedding is still on, gentlemen. 3 weeks from Saturday, just as planned. Her eyes found Raphael's again. I suggest you use that time to prepare yourself, Your Grace. Because once I become your Duchess, your real education is going to begin. With that, she swept out of the room, leaving 4 very shaken men behind her. Raphael sank into his leather chair, touching his stinging cheek. For the first time in his life, he had met someone who wasn't afraid of him. Someone who had looked him in the eye and promised him consequences for his cruelty. Well, Sir Marcus said weakly, trying to lighten the mood. That was unexpected. Shut up, Raphael muttered, pouring himself another brandy with shaking hands. Outside in the hallway, Evangeline leaned against the wall and took deep, steady breaths. Her heart was still racing, but she felt something she had never felt before. Power. For 22 years, she had been the obedient daughter, the quiet lady, the mouse everyone could ignore. Not anymore. As she walked back toward the main house, Evangeline's mind was already spinning with plans. Raphael Blackwood thought he could humiliate her? He thought he could treat her like a business transaction? He was about to discover that his plain, boring little bride-to-be was much more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The war between them had just begun, and Evangeline intended to win. 3 weeks later, the morning of the wedding arrived with gray clouds hanging heavy over St. Michael's Cathedral. Raphael stood at the altar in his formal black coat, adjusting his white gloves for the 10th time. His stomach felt like it was full of rocks. He hadn't seen Evangeline since that terrible day in his study, and he had no idea what to expect. His friends had tried to convince him that she would calm down by the wedding day. Women always get emotional, Lord Pemberton had said with a wave of his hand. She'll come around once she sees all the benefits of being a duchess. But Raphael wasn't so sure. The memory of her blazing green eyes and that chilling smile haunted his dreams. The cathedral doors opened, and a wave of whispers rippled through the crowd of 300 guests. Raphael turned toward the entrance, expecting to see the same plain, unremarkable woman he had dismissed so cruelly. Instead, his jaw dropped open in shock. The woman walking down the aisle looked nothing like the Evangeline he remembered. Her chestnut hair was styled in an elegant arrangement that framed her face perfectly, making her cheekbones look sharper and more defined. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of ivory silk and French lace that hugged her figure in all the right places, showing curves he had never noticed before. But it was her face that truly stunned him. Her skin seemed to glow, her lips were the perfect shade of pink, and her green eyes sparkled with confidence and something else he couldn't quite identify. As she walked past the pews, guests turned to stare at her in amazement. "Is that really the Fairfax girl?" he heard someone whisper. "She's absolutely beautiful," came another voice. "The Duke is a lucky man." But Raphael didn't feel lucky. He felt confused and somehow threatened. This wasn't the mousy woman he thought he could easily control and humiliate. This woman looked like she could hold her own in any situation. When Evangeline reached the altar, she looked directly into his eyes and smiled. It was a polite, proper bride smile, but Raphael could see the steel underneath it. She was reminding him without words that she had promised him consequences, and now it was time to pay. "Dearly beloved," the priest began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of His Grace, Duke Raphael Blackwood, and Lady Evangeline Fairfax in holy matrimony." As the ceremony continued, Raphael found himself studying his bride's face. How had he missed her beauty before? Had she been hiding it deliberately, or had he been so prejudiced that he simply couldn't see it? Every time she spoke her vows, her voice was clear and strong, carrying easily through the large cathedral. "Do you, Lady Evangeline, take this man to be your husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, until death do you part?" Evangeline's eyes never left Raphael's face as she answered. "I do," she said firmly. But then she added something that made his blood run cold. "And I promise to be the wife you deserve, Your Grace." The priest didn't seem to notice anything unusual about her words, but Raphael heard the hidden meaning clearly. She wasn't promising to be a good wife. She was promising to give him exactly what his cruel behavior had earned. When it came time to exchange rings, Evangeline's hand was steady as a rock. Raphael's, on the other hand, trembled slightly as he slipped the gold band onto her finger. "With this ring, I thee wed," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "With this ring, I thee wed," she repeated, sliding his ring onto his finger with a grip that was just a little too tight. "And with it, I bind myself to you completely, my lord husband." Again, her words sounded perfectly normal to everyone else, but Raphael heard the threat underneath. She was telling him that she wasn't going anywhere, that whatever she had planned for him, he wouldn't be able to escape it. The priest pronounced them husband and wife, and Raphael leaned down to kiss his new bride. Evangeline's lips were soft and warm, but the kiss felt more like a challenge than a romantic moment. When they separated, she whispered so quietly that only he could hear, "Let the games begin." The wedding breakfast was held in the grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor. Evangeline moved through the crowd like she had been born to be a duchess. She charmed every single guest with her wit and grace, accepting congratulations and compliments with perfect poise. Raphael watched in growing amazement as she effortlessly handled conversations about politics, literature, and society gossip. "Your bride is absolutely delightful," gushed Lady Morrison, the biggest gossip in London. "So intelligent and well-spoken. You're a very fortunate man, Your Grace." "Indeed she is," Raphael replied automatically, but his mind was spinning. Where had this confident, socially skilled woman come from? Had she been pretending to be boring and plain all along? As the afternoon wore on, Raphael began to notice something troubling. Every conversation Evangeline had seemed designed to make him look bad by comparison. When Lord Chester complimented her on her knowledge of French literature, she replied, "Oh, I do love to read. My husband prefers more physical activities." The way she said it made it sound like she was talking about drinking and gambling rather than hunting and riding. When Mrs. Pemberton asked about their honeymoon plans, Evangeline smiled sweetly and said, "His Grace has been so busy with his social obligations that we haven't had time to discuss it properly. But I'm sure he'll make time for his wife, eventually." Again, her tone was perfectly polite, but everyone within earshot got the impression that Raphael was neglecting his new bride. The final blow came when his own mother, the Dowager Duchess, pulled him aside. "Raphael, your wife is absolutely charming," she said, beaming with approval. "I had my doubts about this arranged marriage, but I can see now that your father chose very well indeed. She's going to make an excellent duchess." "Thank you, Mother," Raphael said weakly. "You must promise me you'll treat her well," his mother continued, her voice becoming serious. "A woman of her quality deserves respect and affection. Don't make the same mistakes your father made with me." Raphael nodded, feeling like the world had turned upside down. 3 weeks ago, everyone had seen Evangeline as a plain, quiet girl who was lucky to catch a duke. Now, thanks to her transformation and subtle manipulation, everyone saw her as a prize that he was lucky to have won. As the last guests finally left and the servants began cleaning up, Raphael found himself alone with his new wife in the grand entrance hall. Evangeline was pulling off her white silk gloves, looking perfectly calm and collected despite the long day. "That went well, don't you think?" she said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather. "What did you do?" Raphael asked bluntly. "How did you? Why do you look so different?" Evangeline tilted her head, studying him with those sharp green eyes. "I look different because you never really looked at me before," she said simply. "You saw what you expected to see, a plain, boring girl who would be grateful for your attention. You never bothered to look deeper. But the way you handled everyone today, the things you said—" "What about them?" she asked innocently. "I was perfectly polite to all our guests. I never said a single unkind word about you. You made me look like a neglectful husband and a lazy nobleman," Raphael accused. "Did I?" Evangeline's smile was as sharp as a blade. "Or did I simply tell the truth about your behavior and let people draw their own conclusions?" Raphael opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. She was right. She hadn't lied about anything. She had simply presented facts in a way that made him look bad. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" he asked quietly. "Oh yes," Evangeline said, starting to walk up the grand staircase toward their private chambers. "I told you that you were about to get an education, my dear husband. Today was just your first lesson." She paused on the landing and looked back down at him. "I should mention that I've already spoken with your mother about redecorating the master suite. She thinks it's a wonderful idea for us to make a fresh start together. The workers will begin tomorrow." "You can't just change my rooms without asking me," Raphael protested. "Actually, I can," Evangeline replied sweetly. "As your duchess, I now have authority over all domestic arrangements in this house. It's traditional, and your mother agrees completely." She started walking again, then called back over her shoulder. "Oh, and darling? I've arranged for us to have separate bedrooms while the renovations are taking place. For propriety's sake, of course." Raphael stood alone in the entrance hall, staring up at the empty staircase where his wife had just disappeared. In one day, she had managed to charm his mother, manipulate his guests, subtly damage his reputation, and banish him from his own bedroom. And she had done it all with perfect politeness and a sweet smile. He was beginning to understand that he hadn't married a mouse after all. He had married a master strategist, and she was just getting started. "Sleep well, husband," her voice echoed in his memory from that day in his study. "Tomorrow your real education begins." As Raphael slowly climbed the stairs to his lonely guest bedroom, he realized with growing dread that Evangeline Blackwood was a woman who kept her promises. And he was about to learn exactly what it cost to underestimate her. 2 weeks into their marriage, Raphael could barely recognize his own home. What had once been a dim, imposing fortress of routine and silent resentment now felt like a place in constant motion. Evangeline had swept through Blackwood Manor like a hurricane in silk, transforming everything she touched. Drapes had been replaced, floors polished to a mirror-like sheen, and even the once dour gardens now hummed with activity from newly hired gardeners. The staff who had once treated Raphael with stiff, grudging respect born of fear now practically worshipped his wife, bending their schedules and hearts to her will. "Good morning, Mrs. Hartwell," Evangeline said warmly to the head cook as Raphael entered the breakfast room. Her voice carried a soft music, as though she meant every word. "The staff meal you prepared yesterday was excellent. Please make sure to order extra meat for next week. The footmen have been working so hard with the renovations." Mrs. Hartwell, who had spent decades cooking in near silence for the Blackwoods, beamed with visible pride. "Thank you, Your Grace. It's such a pleasure to work for someone who notices these things." Raphael sat down at the long oak table, feeling strangely like an intruder in his own dining room. In just 14 days, Evangeline had memorized every servant's name, their family situations, and their concerns. She had raised their wages, improved their working conditions, and treated them like human beings instead of moving furniture. The result was total loyalty to her, and barely concealed contempt for him. "Your Grace," said Thomas, the butler who had served the Blackwood family for 20 years. His tone was respectful but cool as he poured Raphael's coffee. Yet when he turned to serve Evangeline, his entire demeanor shifted like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Your Grace, the new linens you ordered have arrived. Shall I have them placed in the blue guest room as you requested?" "Yes, thank you, Thomas. You're so efficient." Evangeline's smile was radiant, and the older man practically glowed under her praise. After the servants left, Raphael set down his coffee cup with a sharp clink. "What's this about the blue guest room?" "Oh, didn't I mention?" Evangeline said innocently, buttering her toast with delicate precision. "The master bedroom renovations are taking longer than expected. I thought you'd be more comfortable in the blue room permanently. It has such a lovely view of the stables." "The stables?" Raphael's voice rose. "That room is practically in the servants' quarters." "Well, it's where you seem most comfortable anyway, isn't it?" Evangeline's tone stayed sweet, but her eyes were diamond sharp. "You spend most of your time drinking with the grooms and stable hands these days." The accusation stung because it was partly true. With his usual friends avoiding him and his own staff treating him like an outsider, Raphael had indeed been spending more time in the stables. At least the horses didn't judge him. "Besides," Evangeline continued, "I need the master suite for my new responsibilities. I'm hosting a ladies' charity meeting next week, and then the book club the following Tuesday. Your mother suggested I start taking a more active role in society." Raphael stared at her in disbelief. "My mother suggested what?" "Oh yes, we've become quite close. She's been giving me wonderful advice about managing the household accounts." Evangeline took a delicate sip of tea, her composure unbreakable. "Speaking of which, I've discovered some interesting things about our finances." A chill ran down Raphael's spine. "What kind of things?" Evangeline reached for a leather folder beside her plate. "Well, for instance, I had no idea that you owe Lord Morrison £15,000 from gambling debts. Or that you've borrowed another £8,000 from Sir Charles to cover your losses at the horse races." "How did you?" Raphael began, then stopped. He had been keeping those debts secret, even from his father's lawyers. "I'm your wife now, darling. I have access to all the family financial records." Evangeline's smile was razor-sharp. I also discovered that the estate brings in barely enough income to cover the basic expenses. No wonder you needed my dowry so desperately. She opened the folder and pulled out several papers with the quiet authority of a general, revealing a battle plan. I've been thinking about how to handle this situation. The good news is that my £40,000 is more than enough to pay off all your debts and still leave us comfortable. Relief flooded Raphael's chest like warm water. Thank God. I was starting to worry that. However, Evangeline interrupted smoothly, I've decided not to pay them all at once. The relief died instantly. What do you mean? I mean I'm going to pay them strategically. A little here, a little there, just enough to keep your creditors happy but not enough to free you completely. She tilted her head, studying his shocked expression with calm precision. This way, you'll stay dependent on my goodwill. And my money. Raphael felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. You can't do that. Those men will ruin me if I don't pay them back. Oh, I'll make sure they get paid eventually. As long as you behave yourself. Evangeline's voice was sweet as honey, but her meaning was clear as crystal. Behave myself? Raphael repeated, his voice dangerously low. No more mistresses. No more gambling. No more drinking yourself into a stupor every night. She counted off each point on her fingers, slow and deliberate. You're going to start acting like a proper duke instead of a spoiled child. And if I refuse? Evangeline shrugged elegantly. Then I'll stop making payments altogether. Lord Morrison is particularly impatient about money, isn't he? I hear he has some very unpleasant friends who help him collect debts. Raphael stared at his wife, finally understanding the full scope of what she had done. She hadn't just married him for revenge. She had studied him, learned his weaknesses, and now she was using them to control him completely. You've thought of everything, haven't you? He said quietly. I've had plenty of time to plan while you were out drinking with your friends, Evangeline replied, her voice soft but implacable. The same friends who seemed to have disappeared lately, by the way. Funny how quickly they vanished once word got out about your financial troubles. The truth of that statement hit him like a physical blow. Lord Pemberton, Sir Marcus, and the others had indeed stopped visiting once rumors about his debts began circulating. He was completely alone now, with no allies except his wife, who had become his jailer. There's one more thing, Evangeline said, reaching for another paper. I'm pregnant. The words hit Raphael like lightning. What? I'm with child. About 6 weeks along, according to the doctor. She looked up from the document with that same sweet, dangerous smile. Isn't that wonderful news? Raphael's mind reeled. They had only been intimate on their wedding night, and even then, it had been awkward and brief. He had been planning to establish separate bedrooms permanently to avoid any real intimacy with her. But we haven't, he began. Haven't what? Evangeline asked innocently. Haven't shared a bed since our wedding night? That's true. But once was apparently enough. She placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. The future heir to the Blackwood Duchy is already growing inside me. A child, Raphael whispered, the reality sinking in. Yes. Which means you're tied to me forever now, whether you like it or not. Evangeline stood up from the table, smoothing her morning dress with a practiced hand. I suggest you start getting used to the idea of being a proper husband and father. Your heir deserves better than the man you've been. She walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at him, her expression unreadable but her eyes glinting with purpose. Oh, and Raphael, I've invited your mother for dinner tonight. I thought she should hear the happy news from us personally. Please try to look pleased when I tell her. We wouldn't want her to think there are any problems in our marriage. After she left, Raphael sat alone at the breakfast table, staring at the financial papers she had left behind. Every debt, every foolish decision, every weakness he thought he had hidden was laid out in black and white. His wife had become his master, and he was completely at her mercy. But strangest of all, as he thought about the child growing inside her, he realized he felt something he hadn't expected. Not just fear or anger, but a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. 3 months into their marriage, Raphael was a broken man. His attempts to regain control had failed spectacularly. When he tried to override Evangeline's household decisions, the servants simply ignored him and went to Her Grace for direction. When he attempted to take money from the estate accounts to pay his debts directly, he discovered that Evangeline had already moved all the funds to accounts that required both their signatures. His final desperate move had been to threaten divorce, but Evangeline had simply laughed. "Go ahead," she had said calmly. "But remember, I'm carrying your heir. Any divorce would be scandalous, and you'd lose access to my money entirely. Your creditors would destroy you within a month." Now Raphael spent his days wandering the halls of his own home like a ghost. He had stopped drinking as heavily, partly because Evangeline controlled the household budget and had forgotten to order his usual supply of brandy, and partly because he found no joy in it anymore. His former friends had completely abandoned him, and London society whispered about how the once proud Duke had been tamed by his clever wife. The worst part was watching Evangeline bloom into her role as Duchess. She hosted charity events that raised thousands of pounds for orphanages. She advised other young wives on household management. She had even started corresponding with members of Parliament about social reforms. Everyone adored her, while he became increasingly irrelevant. "Your Grace looks tired," said Dr. Harrison, the family physician, as he finished examining Evangeline in the morning room. She was 4 months along now, her pregnancy just beginning to show. "Perhaps you should rest more." "I feel wonderful, actually," Evangeline replied, her hand resting on her rounded belly. "Strong and healthy." Raphael watched from the doorway, feeling like an outsider looking in on someone else's life. The child growing inside his wife was his heir, his blood, but he felt no connection to it. How could he, when Evangeline had made it clear that she saw him as nothing more than a necessary inconvenience? That evening, as autumn rain pounded against the windows, Raphael fell ill. What started as a simple headache turned into a raging fever that left him delirious and weak. For 3 days, he tossed and turned in his lonely guest bedroom, mumbling incoherently about his father's cruelty and his own failures. On the 3rd night, he woke to find someone sitting beside his bed in the darkness. At first he thought he was still dreaming, but then the person leaned forward into the candlelight, and he saw Evangeline's face. "You're awake," she said softly, reaching out to touch his forehead. Her hand was cool and gentle against his burning skin. "The fever's finally breaking. Evangeline." His voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Taking care of you," she said simply, wringing out a cloth in a basin of cool water. "You've been very sick." "But why?" Raphael struggled to sit up, but she pressed him back down gently. "You hate me." Something flickered across her face in the candlelight. "I don't hate you, Raphael. I never hated you." "Then why?" He felt tears threatening to spill over, whether from the fever or from emotional exhaustion, he wasn't sure. "Why have you been punishing me?" Evangeline was quiet for a long moment, continuing to bathe his face with the cool cloth. "Because you needed to understand," she finally said. "You needed to know what it felt like to be powerless, to be dismissed and controlled by someone who saw you as less than human." "I never saw you as less than human," Raphael protested weakly. "Didn't you?" Evangeline's voice was sad rather than angry. "You called me plain as old bread. You planned to parade your mistresses in front of me. You were going to humiliate me at every opportunity, just because you could." She paused, her hand stilling on his forehead. How is that different from seeing me as less than human? Raphael closed his eyes, shame washing over him. In his delirium, he had remembered things he had buried deep in his mind. His father's constant criticism, the way he had been mocked and belittled as a child. "My father," he whispered. "He used to say terrible things to me. Called me weak, useless. Said I was a disappointment to the Blackwood name." "I know," Evangeline said quietly. "Your mother told me about his cruelty during one of our visits. I swore I would never let anyone make me feel that powerless again," Raphael continued, his voice breaking. "But instead, I became just like him. I was going to do to you what he did to me." Evangeline's hand moved to stroke his hair, a gesture so tender it made his chest ache. "The difference is, you can still choose to change. Your father never could. How can I change?" Raphael asked desperately. "You control everything now. The servants despise me. Society sees me as a joke. I have nothing left." "You have me," Evangeline said softly. "And you have our child." "But you don't want me," Raphael said, fresh tears sliding down his cheeks. "Not really. This is all just revenge." Evangeline sighed, setting down the cloth and folding her hands over her pregnant belly. "Do you want to know a secret, Raphael? The reason your cruel words hurt me so badly wasn't just because they were mean. It was because I had been falling in love with you." Raphael's eyes flew open. "What? Before I overheard you that day, I had been watching you. Not the arrogant duke everyone else saw, but the man underneath. I saw how gentle you were with the stable cats. I noticed that you always remembered the servants' children's names. I watched you reading poetry in the garden when you thought no one was looking." Her voice grew wistful. "I thought maybe, just maybe, there was hope for us to build something real together. But then I ruined it," Raphael said miserably. "You broke my heart," Evangeline admitted. "And I decided that if you were going to be cruel, I would show you what real power looked like. I would teach you what it meant to be on the receiving end of someone else's control." "And now," Evangeline looked down at him, her green eyes soft in the candlelight. "Now I see that you're not your father. You're capable of growth, of remorse. You've stopped drinking so much. You've started reading again. You even helped Mrs. Hartwell's grandson find work in the stables last week, though you thought no one noticed." Raphael had indeed helped the boy, but he hadn't expected anyone to know about it. "You saw that. I see everything that happens in this house," Evangeline said with a small smile. "Including the fact that you've been trying to change, even when you thought it was hopeless." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound the rain against the windows and the crackling of the fire. Finally, Raphael reached out tentatively and touched Evangeline's hand. "Can you forgive me?" he asked. "For what I said, for what I planned to do to you." "I already have," she said, squeezing his fingers gently. "The question is, can you forgive yourself?" Before Raphael could answer, Evangeline suddenly gasped and doubled over, her hands flying to her stomach. "What's wrong?" Raphael struggled to sit up, panic flooding through him. "The baby," Evangeline whispered, her face pale with pain. "Something's wrong with the baby." Within minutes, the house was in chaos. Dr. Harrison was summoned from his bed, servants ran through the halls carrying hot water and clean linens, and Raphael found himself pacing frantically outside Evangeline's bedroom door, still weak from his fever but driven by terror at the thought of losing either his wife or his child. As her cries of pain echoed through the hallway, Raphael finally understood what Evangeline meant about choosing to change. His old self would have seen this crisis as an inconvenience. The man he was becoming saw it as the most important moment of his life. He pressed his forehead against the door and whispered a prayer he hadn't said since childhood. Please don't take them from me. I'll do anything, be anything you want, just please let them both live. For 18 hours, Raphael lived in hell. The sounds coming from Evangeline's bedroom ranged from soft whimpers to sharp cries of pain that cut through his heart like knives. Dr. Harrison emerged periodically with grim updates. The baby was coming too early, there were complications, and both mother and child were in grave danger. Your Grace, you need to rest, his mother said, finding him slumped against the hallway wall at dawn. The Dowager Duchess had arrived during the night after receiving word of the crisis. You're still recovering from your own illness. I can't leave, Raphael said hoarsely. His voice was raw from hours of pacing and praying. What if something happens? What if she needs me? His mother sat down beside him on the cold marble floor, something the proper Dowager Duchess would never normally do. Tell me about your wife, she said quietly. Not the Duchess everyone sees, but the woman you married. Raphael looked at his mother through exhausted eyes. She's remarkable, mother. Brilliant and strong and brave. She sees things I never noticed, the servant struggles, ways to help people, solutions to problems I didn't even know existed. His voice broke slightly. And I was going to destroy her. I was going to break her spirit just to prove I had power over her. But you didn't, his mother pointed out gently. Only because she was stronger than I was. She fought back when I expected her to crumble. She turned my own cruelty against me and taught me what it felt like to be powerless. Raphael ran his hands through his disheveled hair. I deserved everything she did to me, but she didn't deserve what I planned to do to her. And now I love her, Raphael whispered, the words feeling strange but true on his lips. I love her courage, her intelligence, the way she makes everyone around her better just by being herself. I love how she protected herself when I tried to hurt her. I even love how she made me face my own failings. Tears started flowing down his cheeks. And I might lose her before I ever get the chance to tell her. Another scream from inside the bedroom sent Raphael to his feet, his hands pressed against the door. Let me in, he called to Dr. Harrison. Please, I need to see her. Your Grace, childbirth is no place for a husband, came the doctor's strained voice. I don't care about propriety, Raphael shot back. She's my wife, and she shouldn't face this alone. There was a long pause, then the sound of footsteps. Dr. Harrison opened the door, his face grave and his sleeves rolled up. Very well, but stay out of the way. And prepare yourself. This is not going well. The bedroom looked like a battlefield. Evangeline lay pale and exhausted on sweat-soaked sheets, her chestnut hair plastered to her head. Two midwives worked frantically around her while Mrs. Hartwell held cool cloths to her forehead. When Evangeline saw Raphael, her eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, she gasped between contractions. I'm losing the baby. I'm failing you. Raphael rushed to her side and took her hand, not caring about the shocked looks from the midwives. You're not failing anyone, he said firmly, squeezing her fingers. You're the strongest person I know. You can do this. The baby's too small, Dr. Harrison said grimly. And Her Grace has lost a lot of blood. I'm not sure either of them will survive this. No. Raphael's voice was steel. You save them both. Whatever it takes, you save my wife and my child. For the next 6 hours, Raphael stayed by Evangeline's side, holding her hand and talking to her during the worst moments. He told her about his childhood fears, his regrets, and his hopes for their future. He confessed every cruel thought he had ever had about her and begged her forgiveness. Most importantly, he told her over and over that he loved her. I love your brilliant mind, he whispered as she gripped his hand during another contraction. I love how you see solutions where others see problems. I love how you made our servants feel valued and respected. Raphael, she gasped. If I don't survive this, you will, he interrupted fiercely. You have to. I just found you. I just figured out who I want to be because of you. You can't leave me now. But if I don't, promise me you'll be a good father to our child. Promise me you'll be the man I saw glimpses of, not the man you were trained to be. I promise, Raphael said, bringing her hand to his lips. But you're going to be here to make sure I keep that promise. You're going to raise our child with me and teach them to be as strong and kind as you are. As afternoon faded to evening, Evangeline's strength began to fail. Her contractions became weaker, and she drifted in and out of consciousness. Dr. Harrison pulled Raphael aside with a grave expression. Your Grace, I need to be honest with you. The Duchess is losing too much blood, and the baby is in distress. I may have to choose between saving your wife or saving your child. Raphael felt the world tilt around him. What do you mean, choose? If I try to save the baby, your wife will almost certainly die. If I focus on saving her, the baby will not survive. Dr. Harrison's voice was compassionate but clinical. As her husband, the decision is yours. The weight of that choice nearly brought Raphael to his knees. His heir, the future of the Blackwood line, or the woman who had become the center of his world. A month ago, the decision would have been easy. The heir mattered more than the woman. But now, looking at Evangeline's pale face, Raphael knew there was no choice at all. Save my wife, he said without hesitation. Save Evangeline. Dr. Harrison nodded grimly. Very well. But Your Grace, you should say goodbye to your child. As the doctor prepared for the final procedure, Raphael knelt beside the bed and took Evangeline's hand. She was barely conscious, but she squeezed his fingers weakly. I love you, he whispered in her ear. I love you more than titles or heirs or anything else in this world. I choose you, Evangeline. I will always choose you. A tear slipped down her cheek. I love you too, she breathed. I'm sorry I made you suffer. I was so angry, so hurt. You had every right to be angry. I was cruel and selfish, and I didn't deserve your kindness. Raphael kissed her forehead gently. But somehow you made me into a man worthy of your love. That's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. The baby, she whispered. We'll be fine, Raphael lied gently, not wanting her to carry that burden. Just rest now. Let me take care of you for once. But just as Dr. Harrison prepared to begin the procedure that would save Evangeline's life at the cost of their child's, something miraculous happened. Evangeline's body gave one final, tremendous push, and suddenly the room filled with a tiny, angry wail. It's a boy. Dr. Harrison shouted in amazement. A son. The midwives sprang into action, cleaning and wrapping the incredibly small baby while Dr. Harrison worked to stop Evangeline's bleeding. For several terrifying minutes, Raphael thought he might still lose his wife, but slowly, gradually, her color began to return. He's so small, Evangeline whispered when they placed the baby in her arms. The child was indeed tiny, but his lungs were strong and his eyes were bright and alert. He's perfect, Raphael said, touching his son's impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers immediately wrapped around his father's finger with surprising strength. He's a fighter, just like his mother. Evangeline looked up at her husband with wonder. You stayed with me through all of that. Where else would I be? Raphael asked, stroking her hair. You're my wife, my partner, my equal. We face everything together from now on. Even after everything I put you through, the way I controlled you and manipulated you. Raphael considered this seriously. You taught me what it felt like to be powerless, yes. But you also showed me what real strength looks like. You could have destroyed me completely, but instead you gave me chances to change. You protected yourself without becoming cruel like I was. He leaned down and kissed her gently. Besides, I deserved every bit of it. You were fighting for your dignity and your future. I was just fighting to maintain power I hadn't earned. So what happens now? Evangeline asked, shifting the baby to a more comfortable position. Now we start over, Raphael said simply. As equals, as partners, as people who choose to love each other instead of people forced together by contract. He smiled down at their son. And we teach this little fighter that strength comes from protecting others, not from dominating them. Dr. Harrison approached with a tired but relieved smile. Your Grace, both mother and baby are going to be fine. The child is small but healthy, and the Duchess is stronger than she looks. I could have told you that, Raphael said with a laugh, the first genuine laugh he had felt in months. She's the strongest person I've ever met. As the medical team cleaned up and the household settled into the quiet rhythms of recovery, Raphael sat beside his wife's bed, marveling at how completely his life had changed. 6 months ago, he had been a cruel, selfish man who saw marriage as a burden and women as objects to be controlled. Now he was a husband who had found his equal, a father who understood that his most important job was not to rule but to protect and nurture. He had learned that real power came not from inspiring fear but from earning respect and love. Thank you, he whispered to Evangeline as she drifted off to sleep with their son in her arms. For what? She murmured without opening her eyes. For not giving up on me. For seeing something worth saving underneath all my cruelty. Raphael settled into the chair beside her bed, planning to keep watch over his family through the night. For teaching me what love actually means. Evangeline smiled softly. You taught me something too. What's that? That even the cruelest hearts can learn to be kind. That change is possible if someone is brave enough to face their own failings. She opened her eyes and looked at him with love and wonder. You chose me over your heir, Raphael. You chose love over duty. That's when I knew you had truly changed. As his wife and son slept peacefully in the soft candlelight, Raphael reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with cruelty and manipulation, with two people trying to wound each other out of pride and pain. But somehow, through conflict and crisis, they had found something neither of them had expected, a love based on mutual respect, understanding, and the courage to become better than they had been. The cruel Duke was gone forever, replaced by a man who understood that true strength lay not in breaking others, but in building them up. And the woman who had been strong enough to tame him had become his partner in every sense of the word. Their real life together was just beginning. 6 months later, Blackwood Manor had transformed into something unrecognizable from the cold, bitter place it had once been. Baby Thomas Blackwood filled the halls with his laughter, while his parents worked side by side to rebuild both their estate and their marriage. Raphael had thrown himself into learning proper estate management, taking advice from his wife and treating their tenants with fairness and respect. Their love had grown from the ashes of conflict into something deeper and more genuine than either had imagined possible. But their happiness was about to face its greatest test. Your Grace, Thomas the butler announced one crisp October morning, his face troubled. Lady Catherine Whitmore is here to see you. She insists it's urgent. Raphael looked up from the account books he had been reviewing with Evangeline in the morning room. Lady Catherine had been his most prominent mistress before his marriage, a beautiful but calculating woman who had made no secret of her displeasure when he ended their arrangement. Tell her I'm not receiving visitors, Raphael said firmly, reaching for Evangeline's hand. My wife and I are busy with estate business. I'm afraid she won't accept that answer, Your Grace, Thomas replied uncomfortably. She says she has important news that affects the future of the Blackwood line. Evangeline squeezed Raphael's hand reassuringly. We should see what she wants, she said calmly. Whatever it is, We'll face it together. Lady Catherine swept into the room like a storm cloud, her dark hair perfectly arranged and her expensive blue gown cut to show off her figure. She was still beautiful, but there was something hard and desperate in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Raphael, darling," she purred, completely ignoring Evangeline. "You look well. Marriage obviously agrees with you." "Lady Catherine," Raphael replied coolly, standing but not moving away from his wife's chair. "What brings you here?" Catherine's smile turned sharp. "I think you know." She placed a dramatic hand on her stomach, which Evangeline noticed was slightly rounded beneath the fashionable dress. "I'm carrying your child." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Evangeline felt her heart stop for a moment, but she kept her expression carefully neutral. This was exactly the kind of crisis that could destroy everything they had built together. "That's impossible," Raphael said immediately. "We ended our arrangement over 8 months ago, before my wedding." "Did we?" Catherine asked with a cruel smile. "I seem to remember a rather passionate farewell encounter just 2 weeks before your wedding day. Surely you haven't forgotten already." Evangeline's blood ran cold. 2 weeks before their wedding, Raphael had disappeared for an entire day, claiming he had business in London. She had wondered at the time but had been too focused on her own wedding preparations to press him about it. "That never happened," Raphael said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Oh, but it did," Catherine continued, enjoying the doubt she was sowing. "You were so distraught about your forced marriage to this plain little mouse. You needed comfort from a real woman." She looked directly at Evangeline for the first time. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Your Grace, but I couldn't let my child grow up a bastard when his father is a duke." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Evangeline stared at the other woman, her mind racing through possibilities and implications. If Catherine was telling the truth, if she really was carrying Raphael's child, it would destroy everything. The scandal would ruin them socially, and legally, a male heir born to a mistress could potentially challenge little Thomas's inheritance. But something about Catherine's story didn't feel right to Evangeline. The timing was too convenient, the woman's desperation too obvious. Catherine had lost her position as a duke's mistress and with it her financial security. She needed money, and she needed it badly. When exactly did this encounter take place? Evangeline asked calmly, finally speaking for the first time. Catherine looked surprised by the question. "I told you, 2 weeks before your wedding." "Yes, but what day specifically? What time? Where?" Evangeline's voice remained steady, almost conversational. Well, it was." Catherine stumbled, clearly not expecting such detailed questions. "Because," Evangeline continued, standing up gracefully, 2 weeks before our wedding was April 3rd. On that day, my husband was at his cousin's estate in Yorkshire, attending a hunting party. There are at least 20 witnesses who can confirm his presence there for the entire weekend." Catherine's face flushed red. "You're lying to protect him." "Actually, I'm not." Evangeline smiled, but it was the same dangerous smile Raphael remembered from their early confrontations. "I remember that weekend very clearly because I was angry that he chose to go hunting instead of helping with wedding preparations. I even wrote about my irritation in my diary, which is dated and witnessed by my maid." "He could have left Yorkshire and come back," Catherine said desperately. "A 12-hour journey each way? Hardly likely for a secret rendezvous." Evangeline moved closer to Catherine, studying her with sharp eyes. "But let's say, for argument's sake, that you're telling the truth. You claim to be 6 months pregnant with my husband's child." "Yes," Catherine said, lifting her chin defiantly. "Then you won't mind having Dr. Harrison examine you to confirm the timing," Evangeline said smoothly. "He's delivered dozens of babies and can determine exactly how far along you are." If you're truly 6 months pregnant, it will be obvious. Catherine's confident expression began to crack. I don't need to prove anything to you. Oh, but you do, Evangeline replied, her voice turning steel hard. You've come into my home and accused my husband of adultery. You've claimed that your child has rights to his estate. Those are very serious accusations that require proof. Raphael watched in amazement as his wife systematically dismantled Catherine's lies. This was the brilliant strategic mind that had outmaneuvered him so completely during their early marriage, now turned toward protecting their family instead of punishing him. Furthermore, Evangeline continued, I've been making inquiries about your financial situation, Lady Catherine. It seems you've accumulated quite substantial debts since losing your previous source of income. Gambling debts, shopping debts, rent on that expensive townhouse you can no longer afford. Catherine's face had gone pale. How did you? I have many friends in London society now, Evangeline said with a sweet smile. Amazing how people talk when they trust you. Lord Morrison, for instance, mentioned that you owe him nearly £3,000 from card games. And Mrs. Hartley at the milliner's shop says your account is months overdue. That has nothing to do with this, Catherine said weakly. Doesn't it? Evangeline tilted her head. A desperate woman with mounting debts suddenly appears claiming to carry a duke's child. A duke who happens to have a reputation for being generous with his former mistresses. It seems quite convenient timing to me. Raphael stepped forward, finally understanding his wife's strategy. Catherine, if you leave now and never repeat these lies again, I'll pay off your debts and give you enough money to start fresh somewhere else. But if you persist with this charade, I'll have you investigated for fraud and blackmail. Catherine looked between husband and wife, seeing the united front they presented. The desperate calculation in her eyes was replaced by defeat. You can't prove I'm lying, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. We don't have to prove you're lying, Evangeline replied calmly. You have to prove you're telling the truth. And we both know you can't do that. The silence stretched out for a long moment. Finally, Catherine's shoulders sagged. I need money, she whispered. I have nowhere else to turn. No one else will help me. For a moment, Evangeline felt a flash of sympathy for the other woman. Catherine was trapped by the same system that had once threatened to trap her. Women at the mercy of men's financial support, with no real power of their own. The offer stands, Evangeline said gently. We'll help you get back on your feet, but not through lies and blackmail. There are other ways to solve your problems. Catherine looked at her with surprise, perhaps not expecting kindness from the woman she had tried to destroy. Why would you help me after what I just did? Because I understand what it's like to feel powerless, Evangeline replied. But lying and manipulation aren't the answer. They only create more problems. After Catherine left with a promise to think about their offer, Raphael turned to his wife with amazement and gratitude. How did you know she was lying? The same way I knew all your weaknesses when I decided to teach you a lesson, Evangeline said with a small smile. I pay attention. I listen. I observe people's motivations and vulnerabilities. She moved into his arms. The difference is, now I use those skills to protect our family instead of punishing my enemies. You were magnificent, Raphael said, holding her close. The way you stayed calm, asked the right questions, offered her a way out that didn't involve destroying us. We're partners now, Evangeline reminded him. Your enemies are my enemies, but more importantly, your reputation affects our son's future. I wasn't about to let some desperate woman destroy what we've built together. That evening, as they sat by the fire watching baby Thomas play on a blanket between them, Raphael reflected on how completely their relationship had changed. Do you ever regret it? He asked suddenly. The way we started, all the pain and conflict? Evangeline considered the question seriously. I regret that you felt the need to be cruel, and I regret that I felt the need to respond with manipulation. But I don't regret the outcome. She looked at their son, then at her husband. We learned things about each other and ourselves that we might never have discovered otherwise. We built our love on a foundation of mutual respect that was tested by fire. And now we're stronger than most couples ever get to be, because we've seen each other at our worst and chosen to love each other anyway. She reached for his hand. We know exactly what we're capable of, both the good and the bad. There are no illusions between us. Raphael brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. I love you, Evangeline Blackwood. Not because I have to, not because society expects it, but because you're the most remarkable person I've ever known. I love you too, she replied. All of you. The man you were, the man you've become, and the man you're still becoming. As they sat together in their transformed home, watching their child and planning their future, both Raphael and Evangeline understood that their story had become something unique. They had turned a forced marriage into a true partnership, transformed cruelty into kindness, and built a love that was stronger for having been tested by conflict. The cruel Duke was gone forever, replaced by a man who understood that real strength came from lifting others up, not tearing them down. And the woman who had been strong enough to change him had become his equal partner in every sense of the word. Their love story would be told for generations, not as a fairy tale of instant happiness, but as proof that even the most damaged hearts could learn to love truly, and that sometimes the greatest transformations came through the courage to face one's own failings and choose to be better. In the end, Evangeline's defiance had shattered more than just Raphael's pride. It had shattered the cycle of cruelty and control that had defined his family for generations, replacing it with respect, partnership, and genuine love. And that was the greatest victory of all.